Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all of you. Happy Monday. It is February the 14th, 2022. I'm so thrilled to see you. If you're here and you're live with me, put it in the chat box. Say hello. Happy Valentine's Day. Sending you all love and hugs and sending you my sincerest wishes for an amazing day. I hope that those of you who have, loved ones and those who your partners or your closest friends. I wish you a wonderful, phenomenal day together. Hey, I'm just thrilled because it's not only Valentine's Day, but this is still February. And this is the month where we are still celebrating Black History Month. And I would be remiss. I've been celebrating it all my life, quite frankly. Those of us who are people of African descent or people who consider yourself African Americans or Black. But I just wanted to come today. I want to spend a little bit of time celebrating and honoring some of our pioneers in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Look, as you know, I have been in this work for a number of years. Some of you know, I've been in this work for about 30 years, and I have actually had the opportunity to work in all different kinds of settings, different kinds of companies. I work with in different industries and in different sectors. And so for me, this work is personal. And for me, this work really is key and critical. It couldn't be more important than it is right now. So thank you for all of you who are here today to help me celebrate some of our pioneers. Now, I'd love to hear from some of you as who do you consider pioneers in the field? What is a pioneer? Well, the way I define pioneers are people who have been on the front lines, who have been on this journey for a long time. They're the ones that were some of the early adopters, some of the early researchers, early authors, consultants, and those who have just been out there fighting the good fight, right? Out there helping every organization that they work with to see the value and the importance of creating equity and opportunities and allowing there to be a level playing field and fighting that good fight of just allowing people to be able to bring their full and authentic self into the workplace every day, and that not mean that they then have to be sidelined or become invisible or that they have to strip off a part of who they are. Pioneers are those who have really been trailblazers. They've been the ones that have been out there when people didn't even get it, didn't understand it, didn't want to have anything to do with it, but they were still fighting it. They were putting the messages out there. They were writing about it. They were doing the work, and they have helped lay the foundation and the groundwork for people like me who came along. So there were people, look, I've been in this work 30 years, but there have been people before me, right? I'm even talking about the civil rights leaders. I'm not going to hit on them today particularly, but they actually laid the groundwork for the diversity, equity, and inclusion field. I had the pleasure of a couple of weeks ago speaking about, Martin Luther King and his life. And my whole topic was all about the fact that today, even though he had a dream that one day that we'd all be able to be judged on the content of our character and not the color of our skin, that dream is still necessary today. We're still fighting that fight of making sure that everyone can get an equal and equitable level playing field and an opportunity to thrive. So I remember even some of the work that has been done, even with the Martin Luther Kings and those who marched before him. But I want to talk about those within the last 50 years or so when I came onto the scene and started this career. This career found me. I didn't grow up one day saying, I want to be a chief diversity officer. I didn't grow up saying, I want to be in human resources. But I am so thrilled that I accepted the call. I accepted the assignment. And can I tell you, it's not easy. It is certainly something that you've got to have the skill set, the mindset, the will set to do, but you've got to also have the courage and the boldness. You got to have some tough skin, and you got to have some stick-to-itiveness to even want to stay in this kind of work, because it's not popular, right? Not winning a popularity contest. It's really tough. It's sensitive. It's controversial. It's polarized. People are divided, even in our nation, in our country, and in our world today. And this is a difficult subject. It's a sensitive subject. It's very controversial. And not everyone wants to talk about it. Not everybody is on the same place and in the same journey and on the same phase and stage of their learning. And so I recognize that. But I'm thrilled and thankful about those who have at least made it a little bit easier for me, even though it's not It's not as easy, but some of those pioneers have come before me and they have laid the groundwork. They have paved the way. They have the blood, sweat, and tears, and they have left a legacy. Many of these pioneers that I'm going to share with you today, I'm not even sure if you've ever heard of them. I hope you have, but some of them are still alive today. Many of them have gone on, and their legacy lives on as well. And I stand on their shoulders and I celebrate them today. So, the first thing I want to share with you is this list. And look, I'm a big proponent of all of those who have celebrated pioneers. All right. I was looking up some of these over the weekend and just what different companies and different organizations have celebrated as what they call pioneers. And too many of them were, not necessarily those who have gone out there 50 years and really, really been, putting the blood, sweat, and tears in it. But look at this picture. This is a picture of what I know and where I've grown up of those who have gone before me. Do you recognize any of those? Right? Take a look at them and you'll see they come from different backgrounds, different, as you can say, the different ethnicities, right? Different races, different genders, different ages and stages in their lives. Look, here's the other reality too, is that, you don't have to be a Black person to be a pioneer in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Look, you'll see Asian Americans here. You'll see people, yes, of African descent as well, but you'll see Caucasians on here. And I love, love, love that you see different generations represented. Some of those are much older in their 80s and 90s who passed on. But I love the fact that everyone can be a part of this work, be a part of this journey, be a part of the conversation. And so, yes, I want you to take a look at this and see that these are the pioneers. And this came out in 2007. I was working at SHRM at the time, and I was also a partner and really worked closely with the Profiles in Diversity Journal. And they were the ones that really put together a lot of these pioneers, as you see here. And again, as I said, I know many of them, and some of them I did not have the pleasure of meeting, but some of them I had the pleasure of working with specifically. But also, the other thing I love about this is when I was at SHRM I worked at SHRM from 2005 to 2014, so nearly 8 years. But I brought together 100 global thought leaders. And I am so pleased to say that nearly 50% of them that were a part of that 100 Global Thought Leaders Summit that we did at SHRM are in this picture and considered the pioneers of the diversity space. Look, when these were pioneers, we weren't even necessarily talking about the word inclusion. We were talking about equality, but not necessarily equity, right? We were talking about civil rights. We were talking about cultural sensitivity. Yes, and diversity was really important, and equal rights. But today, as you know, it has evolved over the last 25, 30 years. And look, over the last couple of years, with so much that's been going on with the global pandemics and with health inequities and calls for social justice and greater needs for inclusion, the work continues to evolve, and yet it continues to reaffirm that this is exactly what we need to be doing. So I want you to, again, take note, and let's honor and let's celebrate those of our pioneers who have gone before us and some of those who are still here today. So let me go ahead and start with, I'm going to share my screen because I have a few of them I also want to share personally. And so I want you to take a look at some of these, and I want you to also recognize how important they are in the work that they continue to do and all that we are working on today. So let's stop sharing there. And I'm going to bring up my screen and share with you again some of those who I celebrate even more so because I had the opportunity to know some of them, to work with some of them as well. So you'll see it pop up here on the screen today as we celebrate. Our first one I want to celebrate is Dr. Roosevelt Thomas Jr. I did have the pleasure of working with him. I had the pleasure of meeting him for a couple of reasons, and I'll share with you. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Roosevelt Thomas was a pioneer, thought leader, and a guru in this area. He's actually one of the first people I started reading about. He's written a lot of books. He was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, very, very well known for the work he did in corporate America and helping to truly get the word out, the knowledge out, the understanding, and the thought leadership around this. So he worked in this field for nearly 28 years of being in the forefront and helping to implement really innovative ways of thinking thinking about diversity. And one of the first books that he came out with it was called Managing Diversity. He served and actually created the Roosevelt Thomas Consulting and Training Company right in Decatur, Georgia. And he also helped to develop and implement Coca-Cola's Diversity Leadership Training Academy in 2000. That's really key and critical because if you might remember, Coca-Cola was a company on their DE&I journey as well, where at the time they had some real issues. And they actually were one of those who settled one of the largest in history, one of the largest discrimination lawsuits. And so we had a number of thought leaders and pioneers like Dr. Roosevelt Thomas who worked with them to help them to put strategies in place and to be held accountable. And they had a wonderful external diversity advisory council in which he served on, and a number of others served on it as well too. But then what we recognize is that through that work that they really became known, Coca-Cola became known as then one of the forefront or some of the most progressive DE&I efforts. Yes, it's a journey. I know that there's some steps forward and then there's some steps back. And then sometimes you come to a screeching halt in your efforts. Life changes, leadership change, culture changes. And so that's why this work never ends. But Dr. Roosevelt Thomas published a number of books. And if you are in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you need to have at least one of his books on your shelf. He wrote a couple of them. As I mentioned, one was Managing Diversity. He talked about, there's another book too that was all about giraffes and elephants and just talking a bit, using that sort of as a metaphor about diversity and inclusion. But before he actually established the American Institute of Managing Diversity in 1984, which it is a nonprofit research firm that we worked with as well, he actually, before he started that, he served as the secretary of Morehouse College. He was the dean of their graduate school in business administration there in Atlanta, Georgia. He was an assistant professor at Harvard Business School and an instructor also at Morehouse. So he was no joke, nothing to play with. He was one that we sat at his feet. We loved to learn from him. I hosted him at a number of conferences when I worked as SHRM's global head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as you can see, he was a former board member. And so as I came on that first year that I came on to SHRM in 2005, he was actually on the board, and I was thrilled to have the opportunity to work with him personally. And then within a year or so of me coming into SHRM, we then worked together to launch the largest US-based study, the largest. I don't even know if there's been one done since then, but we did the largest US-based study on diversity management. It was published in 2008, as you can see, under this particular title. So I was thrilled to work with him for that entire year and a half, not only on the board, but also specifically studying the field of diversity and inclusion and wanting to know what were some of the best practices, what were some of the key challenges, what were companies struggling with, and what were some of the things that we could help them in closing the gap. So we were able to publish that. Another couple, which is interesting, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to meet Janet and Gary. Again, great couple, but they also do this work not only as a couple in marriage, but also as co-partners, co-founders of the Ivy Planning Group. Janet Crenshaw Smith and Gary A. Smith are the co-founders, and it's a 30-year consulting and training firm. But let me tell you first a little bit about Janet. Janet is a native of Chicago. She lived on the South Side, grew up on the South Side as well. But then she earned her bachelor's degree from Harvard University in psychology and in social relations. She also started a professional career back in the day of early IBM Corporation, where also one of my other friends and pioneers who I didn't hit today, but certainly if you've not ever heard of Mr. Ted Childs, who is still alive today. As a matter of fact, so is Janet. And if I go back for just 1 second, back to Dr. Roosevelt Thomas, we lost him a number of years ago at the age of 69. But yes, Dr. Roosevelt Thomas truly was a pioneer, and we've lost him. But Janet and Gary are still alive today, still working hard, still in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's held a number of marketing and management positions when she was working at IBM, but she also has authored several books, several best-selling books. One of them, if you haven't heard of, is called 58 Little Things That Have a Big Impact. What's your micro trigger, right? And then the other one is a diversity action book, 143 things to go and do. She's an engaging speaker. She's frequently quoted in different publications on topics of diversity, leadership, HR, and change management. But she serves on a number of boards, as you can see too, including the League of Black Women, governing group of the Women's Business Enterprise. She also serves as vice chair of the National Women's Business Center. She's even served on ATD, which used to be American Society for Training and Development. You know, they've changed their name now to the Association of Training and Development. And her partner in life and her partner in work is Gary. And Gary actually, again, as a co-founder, he actually has a successful career too. Yes, in sales, yes, in marketing, but guess where they probably met? At IBM, right? He also worked at IBM, held positions in marketing and technical IT areas. And then as you'll see too, he also worked at the Amdahl Corporation as an accountant exec, as well as the Mastor Systems as director of U.S. operations and a couple of others. He also worked at the Federal Reserve Board and Consumer Finance Protection Board, at FINRA, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, at the NRC. And so a number of government positions that he's held as a senior executive, but all of those positions really actually put them in the position to truly be able to serve in this role of DE&I. So as they left corporate America and they launched their own consulting business, which has now been around over 20 years now, they have actually done a lot of work with a number of companies. And as a matter of fact, as a consultant now, you know, I've worked in corporate America for 30 years as a practitioner and certainly as an executive myself, but we actually run into quite a bit of work that they're doing and we're doing, recognizing that there's a lot of work to be done and we're not running over top of each other, but we're certainly seeing that there's a lot of great work that is being done. So want you to, again, celebrate with me, Mr. Gary Smith. And look, I love the fact that he is also from where I'm from. Now, I wasn't born in Washington, D.C., but I lived there for 30 years until I moved to Tampa Bay about 6 years ago. But he was actually educated there in the D.C. public schools, earned his bachelor's degree there, earned his bachelor's degree in political science at Yale University, but still went back and now lives in the Maryland area with Janet. So that is Janet and Gary. Now, here's another one, still alive today, Mr. Frederick Miller, who is today the CEO and the lead client strategist at the Khalil Jameson Group. How many of you have heard of Khalil Jameson? The Khalil Jameson Group. Yes, been doing a lot of work too. He's a past member of a number of different boards. I think many of you have heard of Ben and Jerry's homemade ice cream. Yes, he was a board member there. He also currently serves now on the board of Day and Zimmerman, which is a $3 billion family-owned business. And he also serves at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, Center for Automated Technology Systems, and also Hudson Partners. But he was actually the first person to serve on all three boards of ATD, right, which is formerly ASTD, Organizational Development Network, and the National Training Labs, which is NTL. So Fred is also, again, well-known, very sought-after speaker, speaks at a lot of conferences around the country and around the world. But look how many articles he has published. I mean, he really is a thought leader and a pioneer in talking about this important work, specifically as it relates to not only diversity and inclusion, but also in HR as well as in training and development. He also has co-authored a couple of books with some other, Judith Katz, who is also one of the founders, actually, of the Khalil Jameson Group as well. And she has been a thought leader around as well. She's considered a pioneer. But as you see today, I'm celebrating those of us who are African American and just as we celebrate Black History Month. He's led a lot of transformative change interventions within the Fortune 50, Fortune 100, nonprofit, federal government agencies throughout the U.S. And not only in the U.S., but he's done quite a bit of work with the Khalil Jameson Group around the world. And so you'll see just a few of some of those, right? Merck, Allstate, United Airlines, Eileen Fisher, Toyota, Sandia National Labs. So again, great work there. Celebrating you, Fred. Thanks again for all that you do and continue to do. Thank you for being a pioneer. I want to stop right there real quick and just check and see, do we have any questions, comments, thoughts from any of you who are out there? Just want to make sure too. I know many of us recognize some of these faces and some of you may not. But as we continue to get this work done, as we continue to move forward, as the world changes and as the need grows for greater equity and inclusion, we have to constantly be willing to, again, lean in and learn more. Look, I'm a thought leader. I've been in this work for nearly 30 years myself, and I'm still learning. I am still growing as the world continues to change. And yes, I'm learning from new practitioners who are coming in the field. And look, at some point, I'm gonna be considered old school, and I'm gonna be one of those pioneers as well. I'm thrilled that in November I was at least inducted into the Inclusion Hall of Fame. And so that does carry quite a bit of weight. And I'm really thrilled and honored to have been designated as one of the Hall of Fame diversity champions, along with 11 of my other colleagues by Inclusion Magazine, by Diversity Women Media. All right, so I don't see any questions, but let me keep going because I do again want to celebrate a couple of more. All right, so we're going to share my screen again and take you back to a few other of those pioneers. I just wanted to know how many of you really do recognize a lot of these that I'm talking about today. Hopefully it's a lesson in Black History Month, but also a time to celebrate. What about Mr. or Dr., I should say, Dr. Price Cobb, right? Dr. Price Cobb. He is also gone on now and left such a great legacy. But he actually, has a very unique and different background. Price Cobb's MD was an internationally recognized psychiatrist and management consultant, right? He worked with clients all over the world, but mostly in inner city businesses, as well as corporations and governments, and even higher education institutions. The Pacific Management Systems, which is the company he founded, they are the ones that consulted on areas of leadership, executive development, diversity as a business imperative, communications, and the psychology of networking. So he brought a very different spin, a very different concept, and a very different lens in which he looked at diversity and inclusion. So he developed what's called ethnotherapy. Ethnotherapy, which today we're talking a lot more about that. It's a clinical model that's capable of changing attitudes and assumptions that come from racial, ethnic, and value differences. So how many of us are having those conversations today? I know a number of organizations are focusing on, yes, how do we increase racial equity? How do we ensure we increase social justice? How do we make sure that we're having better, deeper, more substantive conversations around our differences? We're talking about unconscious biases. And yes, we're talking about all the other aspects of diversity as well. But he actually, with ethnotherapy, is a way for us to be able to talk about it in a way that exposes our behaviors, but also our attitudes and some of the assumptions, wrong or right, that we've developed over time through our socialization, through our programming, and certainly through our messages and experiences that we heard. But his model really is a foundation for some of the award-winning series that you might have heard of. If you haven't, check it out, Valuing Differences, which he also co-produced. Dr. Cobbs also received his bachelor's from the University of California at Berkeley, but he got his medical degree from Meharry Medical College. He was one of the founders of the African American Leadership Institute, as well as the Anderson School of Business at the University of California. So again, a trailblazer in a very different way, not as much of the practitioner, what we were talking about, chief diversity officers and managing consulting firms in DE&I, but you can see how he overlaid a lot of his work in the field of psychiatry and also developing ethnotherapy. So thank you, Dr. Cobbs, for the work that you did. I think when we look at all of his background and his experience, look, it doesn't stop there, right? Because then we look at too, where he had an opportunity to speak in South Africa at the first annual diversity conference in Johannesburg. He was a keynote speaker there. And then prior to their election there, he returned to South Africa for the consultations and started working a lot with businesses and corporations and even the government there, and just talking more again about his work in ethnotherapy. He also, and if you haven't heard of the Diversity Collegium, he actually worked there with Dr. Roosevelt Thomas as well, the Diversity Collegium, which is in Atlanta. And also, he delivered a seminar for the United Nations. That's awesome and amazing. And you'll see, too, he talks a lot about ethnocentrism, valuing differences, and certainly in the U.S. foreign policy. And so I'm just thrilled to not to necessarily have had the chance to meet him, but certainly have had the chance to follow a lot of his work and certainly see some of the fruits of all of his labor today. So again, we celebrate you, Dr. Cobbs. Thank you. And Elsie Cross. You can't talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion without talking about Elsie Cross. She was 81 years old, again, when she got one of her last awards and she's from Chestnut Hill, but she was a consultant who really helped bring diversity into schools, especially into government agencies. But she died of a heart attack, unfortunately, but at the age of 81. She was born and raised in North Philly and graduated from a girls' high school in 1946. Wow. And in 1949, she earned her bachelor's degree from Temple University and then taught at Germantown and Olney high schools. Look, she also brought her son in. Her son is Barry, and Barry also worked with Elsie Cross. And it was actually Barry and Elsie Cross. They worked together in helping to, again, fight the good fight of, again, trying to ensure that there were eased tensions around this conversation, but also to continue to manage conflicts. Hers was a little bit different because this little petite lady went out and literally started to bring mediation and help to manage conflict between gangs inside of schools. So one of the things that she was able to do was, again, with her petite self, but also her strong voice and her big heart, was to truly help to bring some conciliatory solutions to helping to bridge that gap where there was a lot of conflict happening in schools. And here's one of my really, really good friends. I do have the opportunity to say I know him. I've worked with him. I've leveraged his work for a number of years. He's a friend of where I used to work at SHRM, and he would speak every year at the SHRM conference. He still does. He speaks all over the country, all over the world. I just adore Dr. Ed Hubbard. And in his business, he also has Myra, who is his wife and life partner, and also works very, very closely with him at Hubbard and Hubbard. But he's an international speaker, international thought leader. He talks a lot about human performance, but what he is known for, his real work is, I'm telling you, he became the guru and the expert in all things on measuring the output and the investment and the input of diversity. So he wrote like 40 or 50 books. I mean, I think when I had him at conference one time, it was like 40. He writes books all the time. So I think he's up to about 40 or 50 books now. But one of the ones that was just a groundbreaking book was the Diversity Scorecard, evaluating the impact of diversity on organizational performance. How do you calculate diversity's return on investment? A lot of people ask that question. They don't know what to measure. They don't know how to measure. And then when they do measure it, they don't know what matters, and they don't know how to truly articulate it to their leaders and to their executives and even to their boards. Well, Dr. Ed Hubbard is the person who can help you put the formulas together. He's got the algorithms. I mean, this is stuff that he just like does in his sleep, but he has just been phenomenal. So all things measurement of DE&I is Dr. Ed Hubbard. And yes, he's a pioneer, but he is also still with us today. He was also an honoree at the inaugural International Society for Diversity and Inclusion Professionals. He's as a living legend, right? So he certainly is that. But he also was one of the 100 global thought leaders that I hosted as well, too. And he's one of only 18 people in the world who received the Legends Award for creating the diversity ROI analytics, as well as the diversity measurement field. So again, he is just a great friend, wonderful, big heart, but he definitely knows what he's talking about as it relates to measuring diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you, Dr. Hubbard, for all that you do. And then the last person going on is I wanted to talk about a friend of mine who is not here, but she is still she's not here in person today, but I definitely wanted to bring her to the forefront. And that is my personal friend, consultant, as well as just a pioneer, and that is Mary Frances Winters. Mary Frances Winters is just an amazing, amazing pioneer, but she's just an amazing person. I've had the pleasure of knowing her very close colleague, friend, sister friend. I really consider her a sister friend, but she is president and CEO and the founder of the Winters Group. And I didn't need any notes to talk about her because I've had the pleasure of knowing her very personally. I know some of the others, but Mary Frances and I are a much more close colleagues, and we work together. I remember my very first time meeting Dr. Mary Frances Winters that was when I was working in a utility company, and she was there as a consultant working in a different part of the company, and she and I connected, and we have been connected ever since. Everywhere I've gone, I've taken her with me. When I left there and went to another company, I brought her with me. I left there and took her with me to another company. She's spoken all over the world. She has an awesome, phenomenal team, and her firm is all about how do you truly have the right conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do you ensure that you are integrating it in every aspect of your organization? How do you ensure, and even for her, she's got some of the most phenomenal books out. I know one of the first books I remember her writing about was Inclusion Starts with I. She wrote another great book called CEOs Who Get It. But even more recently, she just keeps writing. I know she's got another one that she's got right now under pen. She's writing that one. But she also wrote, We Can't Talk About That at Work. She wrote, even Black Fatigue, just talking about how for so many of us who've been in this work, particularly those who look like me, is that we have been fighting this good fight, and sometimes you get tired. And we're tired of talking about it. Sometimes you're just tired of the fight. You're tired of the struggle. Sometimes you're tired of all the resistance that you get trying to do the right thing. But it is so key and critical, and her work it just speaks for itself. But I'm so thrilled to call her friend, but just wanted you to know that she is, again, one of the most significant and phenomenal pioneers still here today, working hard at the Winters Group, has a phenomenal team, and they're working with organizations all over the country, all over the world. She's also been known and recognized with a number of different awards, and also was one of the 100 global thought leaders recognized by SHRM. But she also was one of my partners who helped me to put that on. So I am so thrilled. I just wanted today to stop by as we again recognize all of the work that we're all doing. I don't know about you, but if you are a leader, every leader ought to be involved in this conversation. Every leader ought to be involved in this work. Every leader ought to be recognizing that this conversation is relevant, is timely, is necessary, it's impactful, it's transformational, and it is going to be the only thing that really differentiates you as a company is your culture and the leaders who recognize that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a business imperative, it is a global imperative, and it is a leadership competency that everyone has to adopt. You got to build the skills, build the necessary attitudes, build the right kind of strategies, and put the right policies and the right processes in place in order to do this. And because of all of those pioneers that went before us, clearly we know that we have not only a lot of work that has been done, but we have a whole lot more work that we still need to do. But I thank Mary Frances Winters. I thank the Dr. Ed Hubbards. I thank the Elsie Crosses. I thank the Gary and Janet Crenshaws, Gary Smith, Janet Crenshaw Smith. I thank all of those who have gone before us, those who are still out here on the front lines, those of you who are new to the field, coming in and recognizing that this is an important job, an important calling. This is an assignment, and this is something you can't take lightly. You got to have the tough skin to be able to do it. But I hope you recognize how important this work is. Thank you again to our pioneers. Thank you for all the work you've done. Thank you for the struggle, the blood, the sweat, the tears. Thank you for the sacrifices that you made. Thank you for going before us and laying some of the framework for us to work on and to start from. And thank you again for allowing us to now stand on your shoulders and carry on that legacy as well. And I hope, really, my hope is that as my daughter, who used to ask me as a child, Ma, what do you do? She never really understood, what is a chief diversity diversity officer do? She really didn't understand it until she got out of the house and got her first jobs, right? And started recognizing when she got in the world of work, she understood the work that not only human resources professionals do, but the work of a chief diversity officer. And that is ensuring that she and her generation and the generations to come that don't necessarily look like the dominant group, that they're not necessarily reflective of the mainstream group, or they're not a part of the majority, but they're underrepresented, they're undervalued, they're overlooked, that this work is important. And now today, my hope is that, yes, she appreciates who I am, the work that I have done, but I'm doing it because I know that her children, her grandchildren, her great grandchildren, and mine will come and hopefully will have a better and more level playing field where they are treated with dignity, with respect, that they are judged on the content of the character and their content, and that they are also looked at not just because of their race and gender, that it's recognized, it's appreciated, it's valued, but that the results that they get, the hard work that they put in, that it is recognized and rewarded for that, and that they have equity and they have opportunities to thrive in everything that they do. So thank you again for sharing this with me. Thank you for being here. Happy, again, it is a happy Valentine's Day, but more importantly, this is Black History Month. And I just wanted to say happy Black History Month to all of those who are working to make our world more inclusive and a world of a better place. Thank you again.